Now, some of the worst culprits for having overcomplex slides are finance people. If you're the finance director or the CFO, you get up at the annual conference to the staff, and they'll normally put up a slide on the screen which is full of hundreds of figures, and they will apologise in advance. I apologise in advance for this slide. It's a bit busy, but the numbers I want you to look at are down here, and they'll maybe point out some figures on the bottom line. Well, here's a tip for you. If you have to apologise that a slide is too busy, it's too busy. It's a bad slide. Don't use it. Now let's take this slide as an example. It's not as busy as many as I've seen, but it's busy. And let's say that the point you wanted to make were these figures right down here at the bottom. And the point is that although revenue has increased quite considerably, unit sales have increased by an even greater amount, so the revenue earned per unit has declined. Now, most people would start off by saying, I apologise for this slide, it's a little bit busy, I want you to ignore all these figures up here and just look at these figures down here at the bottom. Some of them would highlight the figures, some of them wouldn't, so the audience wouldn't even be that sure which figures they were meant to look at. But the problem is, nobody will be listening to what the CFO had to say, because the people who were involved in selling widgets A would be looking at the widget A figures, the people involved in the production of widgets B would be looking at the widget B figures, and the people involved in marketing widget C would be looking at the widget C figures. Nobody would be looking at the figures the CFO wanted you to look at. Now, if you just want people to look at those three figures, just show those three figures. Now look, if you are a detail person, if you like 3 decimal points, and you'd say, well, I can't do that, Nick. What if people want to know how we've arrived at the overall company figures? You've got to show the constituent parts. If you really feel that, fine, put that in the handout. And then the people who are interested in it can look at it. But your objective here is to get the point over that revenue per unit has decreased. And just simply giving those three figures gets that point over much more effectively. So I would communicate it. You can either do it a la Steve Jobs and do it like this and just put 3 slides up, each of which gives one number, or you could just use one slide with the 3 numbers on. I think it would be just as effective. I was watching a YouTube video recently of cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker, a brilliant guy, a man for whom I have the greatest respect. And he was giving a presentation on his book, the Angels of Our Better Nature, which talks about how violence has decreased over the centuries and is actually less now than it was many hundreds of years ago, which is not what most people think. And the point he was trying to make was that battlefield deaths, for example, have reduced considerably over the last 50 or 60 years. The problem, though, is that he used this slide to do it. Now, this is an incredibly complex slide, and his point was deaths on the battlefield had reduced. Well, there's lots of stuff on here on the slide that has nothing to do with that, and it just clouds the issue by making the slide more detailed than it needs to be, and it hides the message he was trying to make. He didn't even explain what intrastate conflicts were, for example, or extra-state. I'm assuming it was civil war and terrorist activity, but he didn't say. Now, if the point you're trying to make is that battle deaths have declined, it's far more effective to do something like this. The problem is when you are an intellectual, when you're an academic, you need to show your academic credentials by putting as much information on the screen as possible and to show where the figures came from, etc., etc. Unfortunately, that gets in the way of communicating the point you're trying to get across. You have to remember that is your objective. You look at the slide and you think, what is my objective when I'm using this slide? What point am I trying to make? And anything that's on the slide that doesn't help you to make that point should be taken off. It should be stripped down to the bone. So remember, when it comes to slides, the simpler, the better, and don't get hung up on the number of slides. 30 simple, easy to understand ones are much, much better than half a dozen complex, unintelligible ones.